The telegram arrived in Sydney 3 weeks after the man who sent it was already dead. Surrounded. No relief possible. We will hold. Private Jim Gordon's mother kept that telegram for the rest of her life. Her son was in Tobruk. 25,000 men, cut off in a desert port, facing the entire German Afrika Korps. The world expected them to surrender within days. They held for 242. This is the story of the siege that stopped Rommel. The battle where soldiers became rats, lived like rats, fought like rats, and refused to die like rats. The 8 months that changed the North African War and earned a nickname that would become one of the most honored titles in military history. April 1941. The German war machine has not been stopped anywhere. Poland fell in weeks. France collapsed in 6. Yugoslavia lasted 11 days. Every position attacked by German forces has been overrun or abandoned. Every commander facing German panzers has retreated or surrendered. Except at Tobruk. April the 10th, 1941. The port city of Tobruk on the Libyan coast. German and Italian forces have surrounded the town completely. Inside the perimeter, approximately 25,000 Allied soldiers are cut off from all land routes to Egypt. The bulk of them are Australian, but British, Indian, and other Commonwealth troops hold sectors of the line as well. They have supplies for perhaps 2 months if rationed carefully. The siege will last 242 days. General Erwin Rommel, commanding the German Afrika Korps, has swept across Cyrenaica in just 3 weeks, pushing British forces back hundreds of miles. Every other defensive position has collapsed or been abandoned. Tobruk should fall within days. Rommel tells Berlin he will take the port by Easter. Instead, Tobruk becomes the first place in World War II where German forces are stopped, held, and denied their objective for an extended period. The defenders refuse to surrender. They dig in, fight back, and earn a nickname that will define them: the Rats of Tobruk. This is how they survived. The North African campaign began in September 1940 when Italian forces invaded Egypt from their colony in Libya. Benito Mussolini wanted to capture the Suez Canal and establish Italy as the dominant Mediterranean power. His armies outnumbered British forces in Egypt by roughly 4-1. The Italian advance was cautious. They moved slowly into Egypt, established fortified camps at Sidi Barrani, then stopped. For 3 months, both armies watched each other across empty desert while Italian commanders debated their next move. In December 1940, British forces counterattacked. What began as a limited 5-day raid turned into a complete rout. Italian positions collapsed. Within 8 weeks, British and Commonwealth forces had advanced 500 miles westward, destroyed 10 Italian divisions, and captured over 130,000 prisoners. The campaign was one of the most lopsided victories of the entire war. By February 1941, British forces occupied El Agheila at the base of the Gulf of Sirte. They had driven the Italians almost completely out of eastern Libya. Commanders in Cairo began planning further advances toward Tripoli. Victory in North Africa seemed nearly complete. Adolf Hitler could not allow Italy to suffer such humiliation. German prestige was tied to Italian success. More critically, if Britain controlled all of North Africa, they would dominate the Mediterranean and threaten the southern flank of German-occupied Europe. Hitler ordered German forces to Libya immediately. The Afrika Korps arrived in Tripoli in February 1941 under General Erwin Rommel. At 49 years old, Rommel had already earned a reputation during the invasion of France as a bold, aggressive commander who understood armored warfare. He moved fast, took risks, and rarely gave opponents time to organize proper defenses. British intelligence expected Rommel to spend months building up supplies and acclimating his forces to desert conditions before attempting any offensive action. They were catastrophically wrong. Rommel attacked on March 24th, barely 1 month after arriving in Libya. British forces in Cyrenaica were unprepared. Many of their best units had been withdrawn and sent to Greece, where Germany was threatening invasion. The remaining forces in Libya were scattered across hundreds of miles, poorly coordinated and low on fuel and ammunition. Rommel's panzers moved with shocking speed. They bypassed strong points, cut communication lines, and created chaos in British rear areas. Within days, what had been an orderly British defensive position became a panicked retreat. Units fled eastward trying to reach Egypt before German armor cut them off. By April 3rd, Rommel had retaken all the ground the British had captured over the previous 3 months. His advance continued. On April 6th, he captured the key crossroads at Derna. On April 8th, his forward elements reached Tobruk. The port city sat on a natural harbor, the only deep-water anchorage between Benghazi, 400 miles west, and Alexandria in Egypt, 350 miles east. Tobruk was strategically vital. Whoever held it controlled supply lines across that entire stretch of coast. Rommel needed the port to sustain any further advance into Egypt. The British needed it to prevent exactly that advance. The defensive perimeter around Tobruk had been constructed by Italian forces in 1940 before their defeat. It consisted of concrete bunkers, anti-tank ditches, and barbed wire forming a rough semicircle around the port, approximately 30 miles in circumference. The fortifications faced south and west, designed to stop attacks coming from Egypt. Now they would have to function in reverse, protecting against attack from the west. The Australian 9th Division formed the core of Tobruk's garrison. They had arrived in North Africa in early 1941 and had been fighting across the desert for weeks. Their commander was Major General Leslie Morshead, a 48-year-old veteran of the First World War who had commanded a battalion at Gallipoli. He was methodical, thorough, and believed absolutely in aggressive defense. Alongside the Australians were British units, including the 3rd Armored Brigade with its remaining tanks, artillery regiments, and support troops. Over the coming months, the garrison's composition would shift as units were rotated in and out by sea. At various times, Indian, Polish, Czechoslovak, and additional British units would serve in the defense. Morshead inspected the Italian fortifications and immediately recognized their weaknesses. The perimeter was too long for the forces available. The bunkers were visible from miles away and not particularly well constructed. The anti-tank ditches were shallow in places. The minefields were inadequately marked and poorly laid. But he also understood that Rommel was overextended. The German advance had been so rapid that supply lines stretched back hundreds of miles to Tripoli. Every gallon of fuel, every artillery shell, every spare part for tanks and vehicles had to be transported across that distance on roads that barely existed. Rommel was operating at the absolute limit of his logistics capacity. If Tobruk held, even temporarily, it would deny Rommel the port facilities he desperately needed. His advance into Egypt would stall. British forces would gain time to reorganize and reinforce. The entire balance in North Africa might shift. Morshead issued orders that became famous throughout the garrison. There would be no Dunkirk in Tobruk, no surrender, no withdrawal. They would hold the perimeter no matter what pressure the Germans applied. Officers who suggested planning for evacuation were told bluntly that there would be no evacuation or to plan for. German reconnaissance probed the perimeter on April 11th. They found the defenses manned and alert. Machine gun positions covered all approaches. Artillery responded quickly to any movement. The Australians were clearly prepared to fight. Rommel withdrew his reconnaissance units and organized a proper assault. He was confident Tobruk would fall quickly. The garrison was surrounded and cut off from land supply routes. Once serious pressure was applied, they would collapse like every other position his forces had encountered. The first major attack came on April 14th. German and Italian forces assaulted the southeastern sector of the perimeter. Panzers advanced toward the wire supported by infantry. Stuka dive bombers attacked defensive positions and the harbor. Artillery fired preparatory barrages designed to suppress the defenders. The assault was repulsed with heavy German casualties. Australian defenders held fire until attackers were at close range, then opened up with everything simultaneously. Anti-tank guns knocked out panzers at point-blank distance. Machine guns cut down infantry in the open. Mortars dropped high-explosive shells into concentrations of enemy troops. Rommel tried again on April 16th and 17th, focusing attacks on a narrow front to achieve breakthrough by concentration of force. German engineers cut lanes through the wire under fire. Infantry and armor pushed forward together. Fighting became intense and confused. German forces did penetrate the perimeter in several places. For a few hours on April 17th, panzers were inside the defensive line advancing toward the harbor. It appeared Rommel's breakthrough was developing. Morshead committed his reserves immediately. He counterattacked the penetration from three sides simultaneously, isolating the German forces inside the perimeter. Australian infantry assaulted positions that had been lost hours earlier. Fighting continued through the night. By dawn on April 18th, the Germans had been forced back outside the wire. The perimeter was intact. Rommel was now facing a serious problem. His supplies were limited. His forces were taking casualties they could not easily replace. Meanwhile, British strength in Egypt was growing as reinforcements arrived from overseas. Every day Tobruk held was a day that favored the British strategic position. He could not bypass Tobruk and advance into Egypt. The garrison would threaten his supply lines. The port was too valuable to leave in enemy hands. He had to take it, but frontal assaults were proving prohibitively expensive. Rommel planned one final major offensive. He would concentrate maximum force on the western sector of the perimeter, achieve breakthrough regardless of cost, and drive straight for the harbor before British forces could react. The assault began before dawn on May 1st. German artillery fired a devastating 2-hour barrage on a narrow section of the Australian line. Every available gun participated. Bunkers were demolished. Trenches collapsed. The defenders in that sector were pulverized. Then panzers attacked, followed by waves of German and Italian infantry. They penetrated deeply into the defensive zone, breaking through the main line and pushing toward the harbor. By late morning, German forces had advanced over a mile inside the perimeter. The breakthrough appeared to be succeeding. Morshead made a critical decision. He would not try to stop the penetration. Instead, he would isolate it. Australian units moved to surround the German salient from north and south, cutting it off from reinforcement. The Germans found themselves trapped inside Australian lines, unable to advance further or retreat. Fighting inside the pocket continued for 3 days. German forces tried repeatedly to break out. Australian units tried to destroy them completely. Neither succeeded entirely. Finally, on May 4th, the surviving German troops withdrew or surrendered. Rommel's last attempt to take Tobruk by assault had failed. The casualties shocked German commanders. Over 1,000 German soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured in the May offensive. Dozens of tanks were lost. For an army operating at the end of extended supply lines, these losses were unsustainable. After early May, Rommel abandoned attempts to take Tobruk through direct assault. He could not afford the casualties. His forces were needed elsewhere. British strength in Egypt was increasing daily. He shifted to siege, surrounding the port and preventing any breakout while his main forces concentrated on the Egyptian frontier. The siege settled into static confrontation. German and Italian forces maintained positions around the perimeter. The garrison remained inside, holding the line. Both sides dug deeper fortifications, expanded minefields, and prepared for extended stalemate. Life inside besieged Tobruk was governed by scarcity and danger. The Germans controlled all land approaches. Supply could only come by sea, and even that was hazardous. German and Italian aircraft attacked any vessel approaching the harbor. Submarines patrolled coastal waters. Every supply run risked destruction. The Royal Navy organized convoys that sailed at night from Alexandria. Destroyers and fast cruisers would load supplies in Egypt after dark, race across 200 miles of open water, unload in Tobruk harbor before dawn, then flee back to Egypt before enemy aircraft could find them. Crews called these runs the Spud Run or Tobruk Ferry. Losses were significant, but the convoys kept coming. Fresh water was the most critical shortage. Tobruk had no natural water supply. Everything had to be shipped in or distilled from seawater using equipment that constantly malfunctioned. Soldiers received 1 gallon per day for all purposes. In desert heat reaching 110 degrees Fahrenheit, this was barely adequate for survival. Food was monotonous and inadequate. Canned corned beef, called bully beef, hard biscuits, jam, occasionally tea. Fresh vegetables and fruit did not exist. Vitamin deficiency became a serious medical problem. Cases of scurvy appeared. Men lost weight steadily despite rationing efforts. The garrison was under air attack daily. German and Italian bombers came in waves. Stukas would dive bomb the harbor trying to sink supply ships. Medium bombers would carpet defensive positions with high explosive. Fighters strafed anything visible above ground. Soldiers learned to identify aircraft by engine sound. They could distinguish a Stuka from a Ju-88 without looking. They knew when to take cover and when it was safe to move. They developed an almost casual attitude toward bombing that shocked visitors from Egypt. One Australian soldier wrote in a letter home that he had been bombed so frequently, he no longer bothered taking cover unless bombs landed within 50 yards of his position. Anything farther away was just noise and could be ignored. The Australians pioneered aggressive night operations. German forces controlled the daylight hours. Their artillery could observe any movement. Their aircraft owned the sky. But at night, visibility disappeared. Small Australian patrols would slip through the perimeter, cross minefields they had memorized, and raid German positions. These raids were not large operations. 10 to 20 men moving silently through no man's land in complete darkness. They would infiltrate enemy trenches, kill sentries with knives, destroy equipment, capture prisoners for interrogation, then withdraw before dawn. The raids kept German forces constantly on edge and prevented them from feeling secure even in their own positions. One particularly successful raid in July captured an entire Italian artillery position. The Australian patrol moved through Italian lines in darkness, killed the gun crews silently with bayonets, disabled the weapons, and withdrew with prisoners. The Italians did not realize they had been raided until morning, revealed their destroyed guns and missing men. These aggressive tactics earned the garrison fear and grudging respect. German soldiers began calling the defenders rats. The term was not initially intended as compliment. It referenced animals that lived underground, came out at night, and could not be exterminated. The Australian troops adopted the name proudly. They were rats, vermin that refused to die, creatures that thrived in conditions that would kill others. The nickname spread through the garrison and eventually reached newspapers in Australia. Australian media embraced the image. Cartoons appeared showing tough soldiers depicted as rats wearing slouch hats. Songs were written celebrating the rats of Tobruk. The name became a point of national pride, representing soldiers who endured impossible conditions and refused to surrender. As weeks became months, the siege extracted its toll. Dysentery spread through the garrison from contaminated water. Desert sores infected minor wounds and refused to heal in the heat and dust. Dental problems multiplied with no proper treatment available. Men grew gaunt from inadequate nutrition. Psychologically, the isolation was crushing. The garrison knew they were completely surrounded. Relief was not coming soon. They knew the entire North African campaign had stalled because they were holding this single port. The responsibility was enormous. Mail from Australia arrived irregularly on supply ships. Letters took months to reach Tobruk. By the time a soldier received news from home, events were ancient history. Some men received notifications that family members had died weeks earlier. They grieved alone in dugouts while artillery fell around them. Yet morale remained surprisingly resilient. The soldiers believed their defense mattered. They could see German frustration. They knew Rommel desperately wanted Tobruk and could not take it. That knowledge sustained them through conditions that might have broken units with less cohesion. Entertainment became crucial for maintaining sanity. Soldiers organized concerts using improvised instruments. They staged theatrical performances in underground shelters. They played endless card games. Humor, usually dark and cynical, helped men process the absurdity of their situation. In August 1941, Australian Prime Minister Robert Menzies and military commanders decided the 9th Division needed relief. They had been under siege for 4 months. Casualties, illness, and exhaustion had reduced their effectiveness. Fresh troops would replace them gradually over coming weeks. The relief operation was extraordinarily complex. Replacement troops had to be brought in by sea on the same dangerous night runs that delivered supplies. The Australians had to be evacuated the same way. If German intelligence discovered the operation during its execution, they could attack while defenses were weakest. The first relief convoy arrived on August 19th, carrying Polish troops of the Carpathian Brigade. Over the following weeks, British units, including the 70th Infantry Division, arrived to take over sectors of the perimeter. The evacuation of Australian units began simultaneously. Not all Australians left. Some units remained through the entire siege. The 213th Battalion stayed until the final breakout, but most of the 9th Division returned to Egypt between August and October, exhausted and much reduced in strength, but fundamentally intact. The Polish and British troops who replaced them inherited defensive systems refined through months of combat. Every position had been improved. Minefields were properly marked. Tactics for night raids and defensive counterattacks had been developed and proven effective. The new garrison continued the aggressive defense the Australians had established. Night raids persisted. German positions remained under constant pressure. Tobruk did not become passive. It remained a permanent threat to Rommel's supply lines and a drain on German resources. Meanwhile, British forces in Egypt prepared Operation Crusader, a major offensive designed to relieve Tobruk and push Rommel back across Cyrenaica. The attack involved multiple armored divisions and represented the largest British offensive in North Africa to that point. Operation Crusader began on November 18th. British tanks struck German positions south of Tobruk. Massive tank battles developed across hundreds of square miles of desert. For over a week, the outcome remained uncertain. Casualties on both sides were severe. On November 21st, the Tobruk garrison launched a coordinated breakout attack. British and Polish forces punched through the siege lines at the southeastern sector and linked up with advancing British armor. After 242 days, the siege was broken. The relief forces expected to find broken men barely surviving. Instead, they encountered soldiers who were thin and tired but undefeated. The defenders had held. Tobruk had not fallen. Rommel's forces withdrew westward, abandoning the siege. They had failed to capture the port despite overwhelming advantages and 8 months of sustained pressure. German forces had been stopped and denied their objective by a defensive garrison they had expected to overrun in days. The strategic significance of Tobruk's resistance was profound. By holding the port, the garrison denied Rommel the logistics base he needed to advance into Egypt during the period when British defenses were weakest. The 8-month delay gave British forces time to rebuild strength, accumulate supplies, and prepare counteroffensives. If Tobruk had fallen in April or May 1941, Rommel could have advanced on Alexandria and the Suez Canal with momentum behind him. Egypt might have fallen. The entire Middle Eastern theater could have collapsed. Control of Middle Eastern oil fields would have shifted to Axis powers with catastrophic implications for the Allied war effort. Instead, Tobruk held. Rommel's advance stopped. His supply lines stretched beyond sustainability. His forces operated at the limit of logistics chains that could not support sustained offensive operations into Egypt. The soldiers who defended Tobruk paid dearly. Approximately 3,000 Allied soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured during the siege. Thousands more suffered diseases and malnutrition that affected them permanently. Psychological trauma from 8 months under constant bombardment and isolation scarred many for life. After the war, Australian veterans of the siege formed the Rats of Tobruk Association. They held annual reunions. They maintained contact with men who had shared dugouts and trenches during those months. The bond forged during the siege was permanent and unique. When they spoke about Tobruk, which many did reluctantly, they emphasized different aspects than the newspapers had celebrated. They did not discuss heroism or glory. They talked about thirst and heat and boredom, about friends who died from random shells, about the taste of food that was barely edible but kept you alive. They talked about what it meant to be surrounded and cut off, to know that relief was not coming, to understand that survival depended entirely on your own resilience and that of the men beside you, and discovering that humans can endure conditions that seem unbearable when they have sufficient reason and companionship. The nickname Rats of Tobruk became one of Australia's most honored military titles. Veterans wore it with pride. In Australian military tradition, being identified as a Rat of Tobruk is recognition of service in one of the nation's most significant battles. The siege also established tactical patterns that influenced desert warfare throughout the North African campaign. The emphasis on aggressive night raiding, the use of counterattacks to defeat penetrations rather than passive defense, the importance of morale and unit cohesion in sustaining troops under prolonged siege conditions. These lessons were studied and applied in subsequent operations. Rommel himself acknowledged the garrison's effectiveness in his post-war memoirs. He described the Tobruk defenders as among the most formidable opponents he faced in the entire war. He attributed his failure to capture the port primarily to the determination and tactical skill of the troops defending it. Today, the Tobruk battlefield remains largely intact. The concrete bunkers still stand in the desert. Anti-tank ditches are visible. The harbor operates as it did in 1941. Walking the perimeter, the ground the garrison defended for 8 months, is immediately apparent. Commonwealth War Graves Commission cemeteries surround Tobruk. Neat rows of white headstones mark where men from Australia, Britain, Poland, India, and other nations are buried after dying during the siege. Each stone bears a name, rank, date of death, and often a brief inscription chosen by families who never saw where their loved ones fell. The Siege of Tobruk lasted 242 days, from April 10th to December 10th, 1941. During that period, approximately 25,000 Allied soldiers, with the Australians forming the core throughout most of the siege, held a 30-mile perimeter against German and Italian forces that significantly outnumbered them and controlled everything outside the wire. They survived on inadequate rations, contaminated water, and supplies that had to run a gauntlet to reach them. They endured daily bombing, constant artillery fire, and repeated assaults designed to overwhelm their positions through sheer force. They held because surrender was unacceptable, because they understood their survival had strategic significance beyond themselves, because they discovered that determination and mutual support can sustain humans through the conditions that seem unbearable. The Rats of Tobruk earned their name through 8 months of privation, danger, and refusal to break. They proved that well-led, determined troops in prepared positions could defeat numerically superior forces despite overwhelming disadvantages. They demonstrated that defensive warfare, when conducted aggressively and intelligently, could achieve strategic objectives as significant as any offensive victory. That is Tobruk. That is what 242 days meant. That is why the rats remain honored in Australian and Commonwealth military history as soldiers who stood when standing seemed impossible, who held when everyone expected them to collapse, and who proved that courage and endurance matter more than numerical superiority or technological advantage.